They never saw it coming, not like this. In the barren, oil-rich stretch of eastern Syria, beneath a sky cracked open by the thunder of distant shellfire, a handful of American Special Operations Forces found themselves in the center of what would become one of the deadliest battles U.S. troops have ever faced in Syria. A confrontation not against ISIS or some rogue militant group, but against a column of pro-Syrian government forces, including, most notably, Russian mercenaries. Yes, Russian mercenaries. The date was February 7th. What began as an otherwise unremarkable afternoon turned, within hours, into a full-scale assault. It started with movement, subtle at first. Vehicles edging forward in the distance, indistinct figures gathering along the far banks of the Euphrates River. The Americans saw it unfolding. Through drone feeds, intercepted communications, and satellite relays, they watched the buildup like spectators in a slow-moving nightmare. But here's the problem. They had been warning about this for days. U.S. surveillance had picked up Russian-speaking troops amassing dangerously close to the Conoco gas plant, a strategic installation guarded by a mixed group of Delta Force operators, Army Rangers, and Kurdish and Arab partner forces. Officially, Russia denied any connection to the mercenaries gathering just miles away. They said, "Those aren't our people." Unofficially, American intelligence painted a very different picture, one involving the infamous Wagner group, a shadowy network of Russian paramilitaries who don't wear official uniforms, but serve Moscow's interests without hesitation. And that night, they came to fight. By early evening, over 500 fighters had mobilized. Alongside them, T-72 tanks, Soviet-era artillery, armored personnel carriers, the kind of force that doesn't just accidentally show up outside a U.S. military outpost. The Americans knew what was coming. They called it in. They made the deconfliction calls. The line to the Russian command was active. They warned. They pleaded. The response: silence, shrugs, denial. Then, just after 10 p.m., the shelling started. The ground erupted. Massive artillery blasts tore through the desert air. Mortars screamed down from the heavens. The American commandos were thrown into immediate action, dirt and shrapnel flying, their positions shaking with each impact. They scrambled behind berms, into hastily dug trenches, returning fire with javelin missiles and mounted machine guns. The column of enemy vehicles rolled forward like a hammer, slow, methodical, unrelenting. And for 15 long minutes, the Americans held their firepower back, still trying to reach Russian officers, still hoping this wasn't what it looked like. But it was, so they answered the only way they could, with force. First came the drones, Reapers cutting through the sky, then the F-15s, the F-22s, then the B-52s, the AC-130 gunships, Apache helicopters roaring low over the desert, pouring fire into the advancing vehicles. It was a coordinated symphony of destruction, the kind of response that only the U.S. military can execute. Air, ground, electronic warfare, all dialed in with ruthless precision. And still, they kept coming. At a mission support site 20 miles away, Green Berets and Marine infantry loaded into armored vehicles, preparing to reinforce the Conoco outpost. They didn't know what they were driving into. The roads were torn up, power lines were down. They rolled without headlights, using thermal imaging to navigate, trusting the airstrikes would do enough to clear a path. Back at the gas plant, the firefight was intensifying. Tanks fired from just hundreds of meters away. Infantry pushed forward on foot. The air was thick with smoke, heat, and deafening noise. American troops were low on ammo. Radios were crackling. Targets had to be called in manually, some under heavy fire. One Marine reportedly exposed himself to the open battlefield, manually designating targets for airstrikes using a laser guidance system, knowing full well a single mistake could cost him his life. These weren't just bullets being exchanged. This was a test of resolve, of rules, of international boundaries. Because, let's be clear, this wasn't just a rogue militia. These fighters, many of whom were later confirmed to be Russian contractors, had heavy weapons, coordinated movement, and support vehicles. And it's now believed they were acting under the broader goal of reclaiming valuable oil infrastructure for the Assad regime. Wagner's mission was clear: take the plant, hold it, reap the profits. But they didn't count on resistance like this. By 1 a.m., the reaction force finally arrived. Marines and Green Berets, rolling into the chaos, guns up, joining the fight. The sky was still glowing with the pulse of explosions. The enemy was still advancing. But now, the American position was reinforced, dug in, coordinated, and angry. The final wave of airstrikes was devastating. Howitzers destroyed, tanks immobilized, columns shattered, bodies strewn across the desert, twisted metal still burning. And then, finally, retreat. survivors scattered, crawling back across the river to retrieve their dead. No Americans were killed, one Allied Syrian fighter wounded, but on the other side, somewhere between 200 and 300 enemy combatants were estimated to be dead. So, what does it all mean? At the time, Moscow tried to downplay it. They claimed 4 Russians had died. Some Syrian sources said over 100 of their troops were lost. But the truth, the real story, tells us something far more volatile. That night was not just a battle, it was a collision, not just of bullets and bombs, but of interests, of unspoken red lines, of proxy forces stepping just a little too far. And it begs a question: why? Why would mercenaries, heavily armed and backed by a global power, launch a full assault on a known US military position? Was it a miscalculation, a test of American restraint? Or was it greed, oil and gas fields that were just too tempting to resist? We may never get all the answers, but we do know this. That night, the American response wasn't just military. It was political. It was a message, a warning shot dressed in thunder and steel, that US forces, no matter how small, would not be moved, that an attack on one outpost would be met with the full weight of American firepower, and without hesitation. And while the battle ended, the consequences are still echoing. Since then, electronic warfare attacks against US drones have increased. Communication channels have grown colder, and the shadow war between Russia and the West, played out across the sands of Syria, continues to escalate inch by inch. This wasn't a headline, this wasn't a movie, this was war, real war, with real stakes. And for 30 commandos holding a patch of sand in the middle of a distant desert, it was a night they'll never forget. Not because of the victory, but because they came face to face with a ghost army, one that wasn't supposed to be there, and they survived. And as the smoke cleared, as the first hints of dawn broke across the horizon, the battlefield told its own story. One of dominance, of defense, of how close we truly are at any given moment to something far greater and far more dangerous than any of us are ready to admit. Because when the bullets stop and the cameras fade, the message remains. Sometimes wars don't start with declarations. Sometimes they start with silence and end in fire. What's your take on this intense standoff? Could this clash have spiraled into something far worse, beyond a proxy war, and triggered a direct confrontation between global powers? The implications are serious, and we'd love to hear your perspective. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. And if stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We dive deep into the world's most intense real-life conflicts, uncovering the moments where history almost changed forever. Your support helps us keep bringing you these untold stories from the front lines. So don't forget to turn on notifications too, because the next video might just reveal the moment the world came closest to war and didn't even know it. Thanks for watching, and stay sharp.